Ultimately, what the jobs report said earlier this month was that, look, we had over 200,000 jobs that looked like they were added from the non-farm jobs report. But when you look at the revisions, they were revised substantially downward again for the previous 2 months. Welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today is episode 53 of this week's economy. I'm going to talk about unaffordable housing, what's going on with inflation and the Fed. I'm also going to talk about, what's happening in Louisiana when they're looking at school choice and why we should treat people like people. So with all of that, make sure that you go and check out all the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com, or just go to vanceginn.com. It has a link there and everything else. And you can get this podcast wherever you get your podcast, whatever platform that you like best. Go to that one and you'll find it. Let People Prosper is where it's at. But this week's economy is this episode. So let's get right into it today. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what did the latest U.S. jobs report and inflation tell us about the economy and what the Fed will do next? Ultimately, what the jobs report said earlier this month was that, look, we had over 200,000 jobs that looked like they were added from the non-farm jobs report. But when you look at the revisions, they were revised substantially downward again for the previous 2 months. And so that reduces the number of net jobs that have been created overall. Remember the 15 million jobs by the Biden administration saying that's just false. There have been 15 million jobs added since he's been president. He certainly didn't create them, but there's only been about 5 million jobs that are above where we were before the lockdowns, right? And so really a lot of these jobs are just recovered jobs with the 22 million that were lost during that period of time from the Trump lockdowns. And look, Biden would have wanted harsher lockdowns if for longer. So that situation would have even been worse. So it's just ridiculous that he comes out and tries to claim that he's created all these jobs. It's just nonsense overall. And so I look at this jobs report. I also noticed that household report showed declining jobs on net again. So 3 out of the last 4 months, we've had declining jobs. And so this is just not a good situation. And that was for the month of February. We'll have the month for March in a couple of weeks. So I'll be able to talk about that. Well, also, when you look at inflation still is moderating, but at a hotter pace. It's actually going up a little bit. It was 3.2% year over year. If you look at headline CPI, if you look at the core, we're still closer to 4%, which is almost twice what the growth rate is of inflation target by the Federal Reserve of 2%. They look at the PCE core inflation measure, which includes the substitution effects, and it strips out food and energy. That's really what they want to look at. So, but we'll get a number of that in a week or so. But ultimately, inflation still remains too hot, which is one reason why. What will the Fed do next? They're going to continue to pause. Actually, I'm recording this on Wednesday, which is usually when I record this. And so this will come out on Friday, on March 22nd. They're having their meeting today. The FOMC is the Federal Open Market Committee. So they'll be deciding what they do on their target interest rate, which is currently 5.2 to 5.5%. My guess is they're going to pause. They're going to pause at least until June, okay? Maybe even July, get further along in the summer, especially when inflation looks like it's coming up. If you look at the annualized data from February's inflation amount, we're looking at close to a 7% inflation rate. So it's definitely picking back up. And so I don't see that the Fed will lower interest rates anytime soon. Maybe they'll lower it maybe 2 or 3 times this year because they still have several more meetings this year, but it's going to be higher than many expect because that's what happens when you have too much of a balance sheet of $7.5 trillion, just a bad situation overall. And now there's been a lot of talk about the housing market. So what's up with the housing market? Even Texas Governor Greg Abbott recently tweeted or posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, about we need to do something in Texas about these investors that are owning, quote unquote, 44% or purchasing 44% of housing across the country. It's not even in Texas really, but it's across the country. And this is just a bogus claim. I mean, the Housing Wire put a nice piece out on it. Reason.com just put a nice piece out on it. This is a bogus claim. If you look at the larger businesses that are out there, the investors that are buying more than 100 houses or something like that, they show that it's only about 2% of the market. And if you look at those who have more than 10 homes, it's only about 0.2% of the market. A lot of the investors are mom and pop sort of shops very small businesses or individuals even who go out and buy homes and they rent them out. That's part of the marketplace. We've also got to think about how we got here, right? We had a pandemic. We had the Trump lockdowns. We had a lot of congressional spending that ran up the debt by $10 trillion over the last 3-4 years. And you had the Federal Reserve more than double their money supply, or the money supply in the economy, the balance sheet. And so what that did was put a lot of liquidity in the markets. People didn't just want to buy stocks and bonds and other assets. They bought a lot of houses, including individuals. And also at the same time, so that increases demand, right? But at the same time, people couldn't move because they were locked in their house for so long. And then housing prices went up. So if they sold, then they have to buy a higher house price. So maybe they couldn't afford that. So people were locked in their home. As a matter of fact, with the financial and economic situation, not just the lockdowns themselves. And that created less supply on the market. So you have increase in demand, less supply on the market. You're going to get higher prices, which has created this unaffordable situation. So most of this problem is out of DC. And that's why I really think we need to be cutting government spending by Congress, bringing down the deficits, and hopefully balance the budget and even have surpluses soon to really bring down a lot of the interest rate pressure that's out there, which will also help for the Federal Reserve to be cutting its balance sheet and not manipulating interest rates like they do. And if we allow the markets to work, we will see more affordable housing. And on the state side, Texas and other states should not be doing anything in legislation to try to hinder what's happening in the marketplace. These quote unquote investors that are buying these homes are doing so because there's not a market for them otherwise, right? And people weren't buying them. Higher interest rates, higher housing prices, wages haven't been able to keep up as fast as housing has been going up and everything else. And so this is not a time to be cutting out the legs of those who are trying to sell their homes by legislating these things away. And in fact, what we need to do is think about this as a government failures. We can't solve government failure with more government failure. I hope I can get that across so many times because I'm seeing that from the left and the right, these progressives. We can't go down that route. Don't make Texas another folly as part of this process. And instead, Texas should be eliminating property taxes, putting them on a path to elimination by limiting government spending, which they didn't do a good job last session, and using surplus money to buy down school maintenance and operation property tax, which is about half the property tax in Texas, until it's eliminated. And then local government should do the same. They're also spending way too much, and they should be limiting their government spending and using any surplus to buy down their own property taxes. And we can have a path to elimination. That would be so helpful for millennials, for Gen Zers, for everyone to be able to buy homes, to make them more affordable instead of coming out and saying that the boogeyman is investors. So let's get away from that. It's a bad idea overall. Look, other news that's going on. Will Louisiana be the next to get universal school choice? Sure looks like it. There's a good bill out there right now that's being talked about. And it looks like they're going to get school choice, universal school choice soon. It's a phased in approach. Of course, I would like to see it done as quick as possible now, because the longer you wait, the more that kids are going to fall behind. But sometimes you have political implications that you can't quite get around. It's also limited some on the amount of income you have. I'd rather that not be there. But at the end of the day, what we need is an ESA program. And it should be for everyone, public school, private school, wherever you want to go in, for everyone to be eligible. And it should be fully funded, and get rid of the school finance formulas that are there for government schools today. Just have that as a simple system, and you could save money in the process and reduce taxes. How about that? Governor Landry in Louisiana, also his first budget is a responsible Louisiana budget. It's below population growth plus inflation. In fact, it's being cut when you look at the total budget in state funds. Let's hope the legislature continues to do that. I had a recent tweet out where I talked about why can't we just treat people like people instead of pawns? And this is something that I've been thinking about more and more lately whenever I'm looking at what's going on with what's happening at the border, what's happening with the IVF situation and everything else. But let me just read what I said. I said, what if people were treated like people, whether in the womb, right, at the border, at the end of life, in prison, in poverty, in divorce, online, and other situations, instead of political pawns to pit people against each other and try to win elections? God created people. We should treat people better, which is what limited government, free market capitalism, and constitutional republic can do. This won't happen if government is going to get bigger and more in the way. And I'm seeing that in so many areas where governments just continue to cause more problems. We need to get rid of that sort of insight and move towards more markets and more people. That's what we need. There was another tweet recently by former President Trump said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" My tweet was basically back to that, was like, look, 4 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic and the Trump lockdowns. And I was in the Situation Room around that time when I was chief economist of the Office of Management and Budget, talking with other economists and policy folks saying, look, we cannot be shutting things down. I was sending around memos within the White House and everything else because this was going to create a worse situation over time. Even politically, it was going to be bad for the president, which it ended up being. I think a lot of what I said then came out to be right when you look at schools, when you look at masking, all the things that happened. But Trump really gave the green light for all the states to shut down, and even other countries, which I think has contributed to the mass influx of people and immigration that's coming here to the United States from so many countries, because they don't have democracies, they don't have republics, they don't have free market capitalism that help to support their growth and job creation over time. Instead, they've been put in a situation of poverty and mass poverty, and they want to get out of it. So this is a situation where I don't think that's the rhetoric you want to be using right now, President Trump. Instead, think about how do we have a bold, hopeful vision. Speaking of a bold, hopeful vision, I had a good piece out here recently talking about that. In the Washington Times, I had a piece about similar to this anyway. I also had one on Daily Caller on how Biden and Trump both need a more hopeful and bold vision. I hope you'll also watch my interview with John Caldera of the Independence Institute. Put a link to that in the show notes page, where I make the case for a path to zero using a sustainable Colorado budget, and where you have path to zero income taxes in Colorado. Let's get it done there. Be awesome to be able to do that. Don't miss my commentary at AIER on the economic cost of taxing unrealized capital gains. Basically, don't do it. It's in President Biden's proposed budget. We should leave that to the side. It's economic fallacy. It's just bad news overall. But check out my commentary on that. I had over 180,000, nearly 190,000 views on my post on Twitter. So check that out. Read my commentary at the Daily Caller, which I already mentioned that, about the hopeful, bold vision. Check out my interview with Neil Cavuto on Fox Business this week about the Fed and what they should do next. As I was talking about before, probably not going to do much for a while, but it was a good conversation about why we need fiscal and monetary rules to get the discretion out of the hands of all these politicians. Don't miss my Let People Prosper episode this week with Dr. John B. Taylor, who I think is going to win the Nobel Prize one day. And he talks about the 4% growth target. That sounds great. How do we get there? The Federal Reserve, what they're likely to do, and they need to follow rules. And inflation, what's happening in that, and monetary and fiscal rules. He's come up with the Taylor rule about 30 years ago. Just a great discussion. Don't miss that one. The upcoming episode on Monday is with Dr. Ed Timmons on occupational licensing, the challenges faced by people in the labor market, his new report, and much more. You don't want to miss that one. The quote of the week is by Milton Friedman, again, where he said, the heart of the liberal philosophy is a belief in the dignity of the individual and his freedom to make the most of his capacities and opportunities according to his own lights. Imagine that. Freedom is greater than control. We need more of that. The Bible verse of the week, is one that I think I hold up very high, or I do hold it very high. It's in Luke, and it's Luke 1:49. The mighty one has done great things for me. So many great things for me. I hope so many great things for you as well as we go through another week. And please share this with your friends and family. Give me a 5-star rating. That would be great. And until next time, let people prosper.